My mom was placed in a psych ward for attacking her boss at work. 4 weeks later, my dad was dating that same boss and insisting I call her mom. I was 14 when dad started dating Regina. Mom had been institutionalized for a mental breakdown at work 4 weeks ago. She was apparently just typing at her computer when suddenly she started going crazy, hitting her coworkers, smashing monitors, and even assaulted her boss, Regina. She was supposedly taken to the hospital, diagnosed with schizoactive disorder, and placed on a 180-day hold. Regina showed up with a casserole and a sympathetic smile just 2 days later. Dad invited her in, and she never really left. At first, it was just dinners where she'd check on us and make sure we were okay. Then she started bringing groceries and helping with homework. Dad kept saying how generous she was to forgive Mom for attacking her. The thing that bothered me most was how happy Dad seemed. Not relieved that someone was helping, happy. He'd laugh at Regina's jokes and they'd stay up talking after sending me to bed. When I asked about visiting Mom, he'd get this tight look on his face and say she wasn't ready for visitors yet. Regina moved fast. Within 2 months, she had a drawer at our house and was picking me up from school. She'd take me for ice cream and ask questions about Mom. Did she seem stressed before? Did she ever act strange at home? I kept saying no, but Regina would pat my hand and tell me it was okay to admit Mom had problems. The breaking point came the day before Mom was supposed to be released. I knew because I'd been counting down on the calendar in my room. That morning, Dad announced we were going on a surprise weekend trip to a cabin Regina's family owned. My stomach dropped. I told him I didn't want to go, but he said I was being ungrateful. Regina had planned this whole thing for us. We fought the entire car ride up. I kept asking why we had to leave today specifically, and Dad kept deflecting. Regina sat in the passenger seat filing her nails and occasionally murmuring about how this was best for everyone. When we got to the cabin, I locked myself in a bedroom and refused to come out. That night, I heard them arguing through the walls. Regina was saying something about paperwork, and Dad was worried about something being suspicious. I pressed my ear against the door and heard Regina say the words that made my blood run cold. She signed the divorce papers, Mark. We can move forward now. I snuck into the living room after they went to bed and found Regina's purse. Inside was a folder with copies of divorce documents dated 3 days ago. Mom's signature was on them, but something looked off. I'd seen Mom sign permission slips 1,000 times, and this wasn't how she wrote her name. There was also a receipt from a notary service in Regina's name and a business card for a family lawyer with Regina's maiden name. Turns out Regina's brother was a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. The pieces started clicking together in my head and I felt sick. I took photos of everything with the digital camera I got for my birthday and hid it in my backpack. The next morning I told Dad I wanted to go home. He said we were staying the full weekend, but I threw such a fit that Regina finally convinced him to take me back. As soon as we got home, I called my Aunt Sarah from the house phone. She hadn't heard from Mom since the breakdown and was shocked when I told her about the divorce papers. She said she was coming over immediately and told me to pack a bag. The confrontation was brutal. Aunt Sarah showed up with my uncle who was a cop and demanded to see Mom. Dad tried to say she was still too sick, but Sarah threatened to call the hospital directly. Regina's face went white and she suddenly had somewhere urgent to be. We drove to the psychiatric facility where I finally saw Mom after 6 months. She was sitting in a gray room looking like a ghost of herself. Her words came out slow and slurred from all the medication. She kept trying to focus on my face, but her eyes wouldn't stay still. When she saw Aunt Sarah, she started crying and tried to explain that she never signed anything. She could barely hold a pen with how much her hands shook. Before I knew it, she was telling us how her violent breakdown at work never even happened. Regina had just approached her and told her to come with her. Mom's voice cracked as she spoke, her fingers trembling against the table. She told us Regina had claimed they needed to discuss a private work matter, something about quarterly reports that couldn't wait. Regina drove them to what Mom thought was a coffee shop, but instead pulled into the psychiatric facility's parking lot. When Mom questioned where they were going, Regina locked the doors and started screaming that Mom had threatened her during their meeting. Security guards rushed out as Regina banged on the windows yelling for help. Mom's confusion and protests only made her look more unstable to the staff who didn't know either woman. The facility took Regina's word without question since she was the supervisor. They sedated Mom before she could call anyone. By the time she woke up, Regina had already filed paperwork claiming Mom had been violent at work for weeks. The staff treated Mom's insistence that nothing happened as denial and delusion. Every time she tried to explain, they increased her medication. Sarah's face turned red as she listened. She grabbed Mom's medical file from the nurse's station and started flipping through pages. The admission notes were all in Regina's handwriting, describing incidents that Mom swore never happened. Sarah took photos of every page while the staff tried to stop her. We left the facility with Mom still trapped inside. Sarah drove straight to the police station, but they said it was a medical matter. Without proof Regina lied, they couldn't interfere with a psychiatric hold. Sarah slammed her fist on the desk and stormed out. She dropped me at home and said she'd be back with a lawyer. That night I couldn't stop thinking about Mom's shaking hands. Dad and Regina were watching TV like nothing happened. I went to Dad's home office and searched through his emails on the computer. There were dozens from Regina over the past few months, but what caught my eye were the ones about Mom from before the breakdown. Regina had been sending Dad messages about Mom's concerning behavior at work for months. She described Mom making typos in emails, seeming confused in meetings, and forgetting important deadlines. Each message was dated and had examples attached, but something felt wrong about the timestamps. Some were sent on days I knew Mom had called in sick with the flu. I printed everything and hid the papers under my mattress. The next morning, Regina made pancakes and asked how I was processing everything. I mumbled something about being fine, and she patted my shoulder, saying trauma could manifest in many ways. Her touch made my skin crawl. Sarah picked me up after school the next day. She'd found a lawyer who specialized in psychiatric holds but needed more evidence. We drove to Mom's office to talk to her coworkers. The building security knew me from years of visiting Mom and let us up. Mom's desk was exactly as she'd left it 6 months ago. Her coffee mug still sat next to her keyboard, with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. Her coworkers seemed nervous when we asked about the day Mom was taken away. They all repeated the same story about Mom acting strangely for weeks before the incident. One mentioned the weird emails Mom had been sending. Sarah asked to see the emails. Mom's coworker, Alexandra, pulled them up on her computer. They were full of random capitalization, missing words, and strange tangents arguments about conspiracy theories. Nothing like how Mom actually wrote. I noticed they were all sent during lunch hours when Mom usually ate at her desk alone. We were about to leave when I spotted something on Regina's desk across the office. A notebook lay open with handwriting that looked familiar. Sarah distracted the receptionist while I snuck over and flipped through it. My hands started shaking as I read. The notebook contained drafts of emails with the same weird capitalization and missing words as the one supposedly from Mom. Each draft had a date and time written in the margin. I took photos of every page before putting it back. As we walked to the car, Sarah called her lawyer with what we'd found. He said it was good, but not enough. We needed something that directly connected Regina to Mom's institutionalization. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about those drafted emails and Mom's shaking hands. The next morning was Saturday. Dad and Regina went grocery shopping, giving me time to search Regina's things. I found her laptop bag in their bedroom closet and powered on her computer. Her email drafts folder contained unsent messages to the psychiatric facility administrator. They discussed Mom's treatment plan and mentioned increasing certain medications. The dates were from after Mom's admission. Regina had been directing Mom's treatment without any legal authority. I forwarded everything to Sarah's email and cleared the sent folder. As I put the laptop back, I heard car doors slamming outside. I rushed to my room just as they came in with groceries. Regina called up asking if I wanted to help cook dinner. I yelled back that I had homework. Sarah texted that her lawyer was building a case but warned it could take weeks. I couldn't wait that long. Every day Mom spent in that place was another day of unnecessary substances and treatments. I started recording everything on my digital camera, keeping it hidden in my backpack. The breakthrough came when Regina got careless. She was on the phone in the kitchen while Dad showered. I crept down the hallway and heard her say she needed power of attorney forms expedited. She mentioned that once she had medical control, she could extend the hold indefinitely. She laughed and said something about this being easier than the last time. I recorded the whole conversation through the door crack. When she hung up, I scrambled back to my room. My heart pounded as I reviewed the footage. The audio was clear enough to hear every word. Sarah came by the next day while Dad was at work. Regina tried to send her away, but Sarah pushed past her into the house. They argued in the living room while I grabbed more evidence from Regina's room. This time, I found a folder labeled Insurance, with forms for Mom's life insurance and disability policies. Regina had highlighted sections about payouts for permanent institutionalization. Regina must have sensed something because she suddenly appeared in the doorway. She asked what I was doing in her things. I said I was looking for a phone charger. Her eyes narrowed and she said I was showing concerning behavior, just like my mother. She mentioned that sometimes mental illness ran in families. The threat was clear. I backed out of the room as she watched. That night, she told Dad she'd scheduled an appointment for me with a psychiatrist. Dad protested, but Regina insisted it was just a precaution given everything I'd been through. She'd already made the appointment at the same facility where Mom was held. I texted Sarah immediately. She called Dad and threatened legal action if he took me to that appointment. Dad seemed confused and upset. He and Regina fought after Sarah's call. I heard him say this was moving too fast, that I was just a kid processing trauma. Regina's voice turned cold as she reminded him how much she'd done for our family. The next morning, Regina was extra sweet. She made my favorite breakfast and offered to drive me to school. I said I'd take the bus. At school, I couldn't focus on anything. Sarah texted that she was working on an emergency court order, but needed one more piece of solid evidence. During lunch, I snuck into the school library and searched for information about psychiatric holds. The computer screen showed that patients needed regular evaluations by independent doctors, not just the facility staff. I printed the regulations and stuffed them in my backpack. My hands trembled as I realized Regina might have violated multiple laws. After school, I took a different bus route to avoid going home. Instead, I went to the public library downtown where Regina wouldn't think to look for me. I used their computers to research Regina's background. Her LinkedIn profile showed she'd worked at 3 different companies over the past 8 years, always leaving after about 2 years. The pattern made my stomach turn. I created a fake email account and messaged former coworkers from her previous jobs. Most didn't respond, but one woman named Nick replied within an hour. She said Regina had been her supervisor and asked why I was asking. I explained my situation, and her response came quickly. She'd call me from a payphone in 10 minutes. The library phone rang exactly 10 minutes later. Nick's voice sounded strained as she explained that Regina had done something similar at their company. A coworker named Las had suddenly been hospitalized for a mental breakdown after disagreeing with Regina about a project. Las's husband had started dating Regina shortly after. The whole office thought it was strange, but nobody could prove anything. Las never returned to work. I asked if she knew how to contact Las. Nick hesitated before giving me an email address. She warned me to be careful and hung up. My fingers shook as I typed a message to Las explaining who I was and what was happening to my mother. I didn't expect a response, but I had to try. Sarah picked me up from the library looking worried. She'd gotten my text about skipping the bus home. As we drove, I showed her what I'd found about Regina's work history. Sarah's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. She said we needed to act faster than the courts would allow. We went to Sarah's house where I could safely use her computer. An email from Las was already waiting. Her message was brief, but devastating. Regina had drugged her coffee at work with prescription anxiety medication, making her appear unstable. The psychiatric facility had kept her for 4 months, until her sister hired a private investigator. By then, her husband had already filed for divorce and started dating Regina. They'd moved away before Las could pursue charges. Las attached scanned documents from her case, including test results showing the substances in her system and photos of Regina's handwriting on fake incident reports. The similarities to Mom's situation made me feel sick. Sarah immediately forwarded everything to her lawyer. That evening, Sarah drove me home. Dad was pacing in the living room while Regina sat calmly on the couch. He demanded to know where I'd been. Before I could answer, Regina mentioned she'd had to reschedule my psychiatric appointment for tomorrow morning. She'd already called the school to excuse my absence. Sarah stepped forward and told Dad about Las. Regina's face didn't change, but her fingers tightened on her coffee mug. Dad looked confused and asked what this had to do with anything. Sarah explained the pattern, showing him the emails on her phone. Regina stood up slowly and said Sarah was filling my head with conspiracy theories. The argument escalated quickly. Dad kept looking between Sarah and Regina, clearly torn. Regina touched his arm gently and reminded him how Mom had attacked her, how she'd forgiven everything to help our family. Sarah countered with the evidence we'd found. Regina's voice stayed eerily calm as she suggested that I was having a breakdown just like Mom, that I was creating elaborate fantasies to cope with the trauma. I ran to my room and grabbed my digital camera. The footage of Regina's phone conversation about power of attorney played on the tiny screen. Dad's face went pale as he heard Regina discussing keeping Mom institutionalized indefinitely. Regina tried to grab the camera, but Sarah blocked her. Regina's mask finally slipped as she snarled that we couldn't prove anything. Dad sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He asked Regina if it was true. She immediately switched tactics, crying about how much she loved him, how Mom had been genuinely unstable, how she'd only been trying to protect our family. Dad looked lost and broken. Sarah told me to pack a bag while she called her lawyer again. As I threw clothes into my backpack, I heard Regina on the phone in the hallway. She was talking to someone at the psychiatric facility, telling them to increase Mom's medication immediately. I recorded her through my bedroom door crack. She mentioned that the family was becoming unstable and might need intervention. Sarah burst into my room and said we were leaving immediately. Regina had called the police claiming I was violent and needed psychiatric evaluation. We rushed out the back door as sirens approached. Sarah drove us to her lawyer's office where he was waiting despite the late hour. He reviewed everything we'd brought and said we had enough for an emergency injunction. The next few hours blurred together. The lawyer made phone calls while Sarah held my hand. A judge agreed to an emergency hearing for the next morning. The lawyer warned that Regina would fight back hard. We spent the night at a hotel, too worried to sleep. I kept thinking about Mom alone in that facility, not knowing we were fighting for her. The courthouse was intimidating with its marble floors and high ceilings. Regina arrived with her brother, the divorce lawyer, both dressed impeccably. Dad came separately, looking haggard. He avoided eye contact with everyone. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the evidence while Regina's brother argued that I was a troubled teenager making up stories. Our lawyer presented everything methodically. The emails, the forged signatures, the pattern with loss, the recordings of Regina directing Mom's treatment without authority. Regina's brother tried to object to the recordings, but the judge allowed them. When Regina's voice filled the courtroom discussing power of attorney and indefinite holds, several people in the gallery gasped. The judge ordered an immediate independent psychiatric evaluation for Mom. Regina's brother argued this would disrupt her treatment, but the judge cut him off. She also issued a restraining order preventing Regina from contacting the facility or any family members. Regina's composure cracked as she realized she was losing control. We drove straight to the psychiatric facility with the court order. The administrator who'd been working with Regina tried to stall, but the judge had called ahead. An independent psychiatrist arrived within an hour. Mom was brought to an evaluation room where we could watch through a window. She looked worse than before, barely able to stay awake. The psychiatrist spent 2 hours with Mom, reviewing her file and conducting cognitive tests. He emerged looking grim. Mom showed no signs of schizoaffective disorder or any condition requiring institutionalization. The medications she'd been given were excessive and potentially harmful. He recommended immediate release and medical supervision for withdrawal from the unnecessary substances. The facility administrator turned pale as the psychiatrist detailed the violations he'd found. Medications had been administered without proper authorization. Regina's name appeared on treatment directives despite having no medical training or legal authority. The administrator stammered about following supervisor recommendations for a violent patient. Sarah's lawyer smiled coldly and mentioned criminal charges for insurance fraud. The administrator quickly agreed to release Mom immediately and provide all medical records. As nurses prepared Mom for discharge, I heard the administrator on the phone with the facility's lawyers. His voice panicked. Mom could barely walk on her own. Sarah and I supported her to the car while she mumbled apologies for things that made no sense. The substances had scrambled her thoughts badly. We took her to a regular hospital where doctors confirmed she'd been over-medicated for months. They started a careful withdrawal protocol and said she'd need weeks to recover fully. That night, while Mom slept in the hospital, Sarah's phone rang constantly. The lawyer reported that police had arrested the facility administrator for insurance fraud. They'd been billing for expensive treatments Mom never needed. Regina's friend, the therapist who'd written the false evaluation, was being investigated by the medical board. Dad showed up at the hospital the next morning. He looked broken as he sat beside Mom's bed, holding her hand while she slept. He told Sarah he'd kicked Regina out and changed the locks. Regina had raged and threatened to sue him for breach of promise, but he didn't care anymore. He kept apologizing to Mom's sleeping form. I spent the next days between the hospital and Sarah's house. The police wanted to interview me about Regina, but Sarah's lawyer insisted on being present. I gave them copies of all my recordings and photos. The detective said they were building a strong case, especially with Loss willing to testify about the pattern. Mom's recovery was slow and painful. As the substances left her system, she became more lucid, but also more aware of what had been done to her. She cried when she realized she'd lost 6 months of her life. The doctor said the psychological trauma might take longer to heal than the physical effects. Regina tried one last manipulation. She called Dad from a blocked number, claiming she was pregnant. Dad hung up on her, but the call shook him. Sarah's lawyer advised getting a paternity test if Regina pursued this claim. The stress was breaking Dad apart. He started seeing a therapist to understand how he'd been manipulated so thoroughly. A week later, the police arrested Regina at her apartment. She'd been packing to leave town. They found evidence she'd done this at least twice before, targeting women in supervisor positions, then seducing their husbands during fabricated mental health crises. Her brother was also arrested for conspiracy and fraud related to the forged divorce papers. Mom was released from the hospital after 2 weeks, but stayed with Sarah. She couldn't bear to go back to our house yet. I split my time between them, watching Mom slowly return to herself. Her hands stopped shaking first, then her eyes could focus again, but the fear in her voice when she talked about Regina remained. The prosecutor built a strong case with our evidence and testimony from Regina's previous victims. 2 more women came forward after news of her arrest spread. Each told similar stories of being drugged, institutionalized, and having their lives destroyed while Regina pursued their husbands. The pattern was clear and damning. Dad put our house up for sale. He couldn't stand living there anymore, surrounded by memories of his betrayal. He found a small apartment near Sarah's place and focused on rebuilding his relationship with Mom. Their conversations were painful, full of tears and and apologies, but necessary. I returned to school but struggled to concentrate. The other kids whispered about my family drama. Some called me a hero for saving my mom. Others said I was crazy like her. I ate lunch in the library, avoiding everyone while counting days until Regina's trial. Mom's former co-workers reached out with apologies. They'd believed Regina's lies and felt terrible. Alexandra visited Mom at Sarah's house, crying as she explained how Regina had manipulated the entire office. She'd shown them the fake emails, expressed concern so convincingly that everyone thought she was a caring supervisor. The insurance fraud investigation expanded. The psychiatric facility had been overbilling for years, with Regina's friend facilitating false diagnoses. More families came forward with stories of loved ones being held unnecessarily. The facility faced massive lawsuits and criminal charges. It felt like a small justice for what they'd done to Mom. Mom started physical therapy to regain her strength. The months of inactivity and over-medication had weakened her considerably. I went with her to appointments, watching her struggle through simple exercises. She never complained, just pushed through with quiet determination. The therapist said her recovery was remarkable given what she'd endured. Regina's trial date was set for 3 months away. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor refused. Too many victims wanted their day in court. Mom would have to testify, reliving the trauma publicly. The thought made her anxious, but she said she'd do it to prevent Regina from hurting anyone else. Dad's therapy sessions helped him understand how Regina had targeted him. She'd studied our family, learned about Mom's demanding job and their occasional arguments. She'd positioned herself as the understanding alternative, slowly poisoning his view of Mom while appearing supportive. The therapist said Regina was a predator who chose vulnerable families. We found a new routine at Sarah's house. Mom slept in the guest room while I took the couch. Sarah cooked elaborate dinners, trying to help Mom regain the weight she'd lost. We played board games in the evenings, avoiding any mention of the past months. It felt like playing pretend, but it helped. The prosecutor met with us regularly to prepare for trial. He showed us Regina's history, a trail of destroyed families across 3 states. She'd refined her method over years, learning exactly how to fabricate mental illness and manipulate the system. The evidence was overwhelming, but he warned that Regina was clever and her brother was a skilled lawyer. Mom returned to work part-time after her doctor cleared her. Her company had held her position, horrified by what had happened. She worked reduced hours at first, rebuilding her confidence. Her co-workers were supportive but awkward, unsure how to act around her. Mom handled it with grace, focusing on her work and slowly reclaiming her professional life. I started seeing a counselor to process everything. The weight of what I'd uncovered, the responsibility of saving Mom, the anger at Dad. It all crashed down once the immediate crisis passed. The counselor helped me understand that while I'd done something extraordinary, I was still just a teenager who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Regina made bail after a month in jail. The restraining order kept her away from us, but knowing she was free made everyone nervous. Sarah installed security cameras at her house. Dad changed his phone number after Regina tried calling from different numbers. We all jumped at unexpected noises, waiting for her next move. The other victims began connecting, forming a support group. Mom joined their online meetings, finding comfort in shared experiences. They compared notes on Regina's tactics, realizing how similarly she'd operated each time. The group gave them strength and validation that what happened wasn't their fault. As the trial approached, more evidence surfaced. Regina's bank records showed large deposits after each victim was institutionalized, likely from insurance payouts and divorce settlements. Her brother had helped hide the money through shell companies. The financial crimes added years to potential sentences. Mom grew stronger each day, but setbacks happened. Certain smells triggered panic attacks. The industrial cleaner from the facility, the perfume Regina wore, loud noises made her flinch. She couldn't drink coffee anymore, afraid someone had drugged it. These small traumas showed how deeply Regina's actions had scarred her. Dad asked to move back in with us once we found a new house, but Mom wasn't ready. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt quickly. They went to couples counseling, working through the betrayal and manipulation. The therapist said healing was possible, but would take time and consistent effort from both. I threw myself into school, determined to catch up on missed work. My grades had suffered during the crisis, but teachers gave me extensions. I wanted to become a lawyer or investigator, someone who could help other families trapped by predators like Regina. The guidance counselor said my experience, though painful, had given me clear direction. 2 weeks before the trial, Regina's brother approached Sarah's lawyer with another plea deal. Regina would plead guilty to reduce charges if we agreed not to pursue civil lawsuits. The offer insulted us. She'd stolen 6 months of Mom's life, nearly destroyed our family, and wanted to minimize consequences. We refused immediately. Mom practiced her testimony with the prosecutor, reliving those first days in the facility, the confusion and fear, the medications forced on her. It drained her emotionally, but she pushed through, determined to speak her truth. Her voice grew stronger with each practice session. The trial date arrived with unexpected snow, coating the courthouse steps in white. We arrived early, Mom gripping my hand tightly. Other victims filled the gallery, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and determination. Regina entered in a conservative suit, trying to look sympathetic. Her act didn't work anymore. As opening statements began, I thought about how much had changed since that day I found the divorce papers in Regina's purse. Our family was broken, but healing. Mom was free, but scarred. Dad was remorseful, but working to earn forgiveness. And Regina, the woman who tried to steal our lives, finally faced justice. The prosecutor's voice rang clear as he outlined Regina's crimes. Multiple counts of fraud, false imprisonment, conspiracy, identity theft, and insurance fraud. The list seemed endless. Regina sat perfectly still, but I saw her jaw clench. She'd lost control of the narrative. The truth would finally be heard. The prosecutor called Mom as the first witness. She walked to the stand slowly, wearing the navy suit Sarah had bought her. Her voice wavered at first as she described the day Regina drove her to the facility. The defense attorney interrupted constantly, trying to rattle her, but Mom kept going. She explained how Regina had locked the car doors and started screaming lies about threats that never happened. Regina's brother cross-examined Mom aggressively. He questioned her memory, suggested the medications had confused her timeline, implied she'd been unstable before the incident. Mom's hands gripped the witness stand, but she answered each question clearly. When he showed her the forged divorce papers, she pointed pointed out 3 specific differences in the signature that proved it wasn't hers. I testified next, my backpack containing the digital camera on the floor beside me. The prosecutor had me walk through finding the divorce papers, discovering the drafted emails, recording Regina's phone calls. Regina's brother objected repeatedly, but the judge overruled him. When they played my recording of Regina discussing power of attorney, several jurors shook their heads. The cross-examination felt endless. Regina's brother tried to paint me as a confused teenager, desperate to blame someone for Mom's genuine illness. He suggested I'd fabricated evidence, manipulated recordings, created an elaborate conspiracy theory. I stayed calm and stuck to facts, just like the prosecutor had coached me. The judge had to warn him twice about badgering a minor witness. Loss flew in from another state to testify. She described her own experience with Regina in devastating detail. The drugged coffee, the false psychiatric hold, losing custody of her children temporarily. She brought medical records showing the anxiety medication in her system matched what they'd found in Mom's blood work. Regina stared at her throughout the testimony, but Loss never looked back. The facility administrator took a plea deal and testified against Regina. He admitted to falsifying treatment records, billing for services never provided, taking bribes to keep patients longer than medically necessary. He confirmed Regina had called him directly about Mom's medications, despite having no authority. His testimony lasted 3 hours and implicated 2 other staff members. Regina's former therapist friend had lost her license but still testified. She claimed Regina had manipulated her too, that she'd been told Mom was dangerous and needed immediate evaluation. The prosecutor destroyed her credibility by showing she'd written the evaluation before ever meeting Mom. She left the stand in tears. Dad testified on the 4th day. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched as he described how Regina had slowly poisoned his view of Mom. He admitted to signing papers without reading them, believing Regina's lies about Mom's condition, ignoring his instincts that something felt wrong. When asked why he'd trusted Regina so completely, he said he'd been lonely and she'd seemed so caring. The prosecutor presented Regina's financial records next. Bank statements showed deposits matching insurance payouts from Mom's policy. There were payments to the facility administrator, the therapist, even the notary who'd supposedly witnessed Mom's signature. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Regina's face remained expressionless as each transaction appeared on the courtroom screen. More victims testified via video link. A woman from Regina's first job described an almost identical scheme. Another victim's daughter explained finding her mother over-medicated and incoherent after Regina became involved with her father. The pattern became undeniable as each woman shared her story. The jury took extensive notes. Regina's defense was weak. Her brother called character witnesses who barely knew her, presented alternative explanations that made no sense, tried to discredit every piece of evidence. He suggested Mom had genuinely needed treatment, that I'd misunderstood adult situations, that the other victims were copycat attention seekers. Nobody believed him. When Regina took the stand, she played the victim. She claimed Mom had threatened her, that she'd only tried to help our family, that everyone was conspiring against her now. She cried perfectly on cue, dabbed her eyes with tissues, looked pleadingly at the jury. But when the prosecutor questioned her about the forged signatures, she fumbled. Her story kept changing. The prosecutor's closing argument was methodical and devastating. He walked the jury through each crime, showed how Regina had refined her technique over years, demonstrated the calculated cruelty of her actions. He reminded them of Mom's shaking hands, the months of unnecessary medication, the families destroyed for money. He asked for the maximum sentence on all counts. Regina's brother made one last attempt in his closing. He painted Regina as a misunderstood woman who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve prison. He suggested probation and community service would be sufficient. Several jurors visibly rolled their eyes. His heart wasn't in it anymore. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. We waited in a small room, Mom clutching my hand while Sarah paced. Dad sat alone in the corner, staring at his phone. When they called us back, Regina stood perfectly still as the foreman read the verdicts. Guilty on all counts. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of false imprisonment. Guilty of conspiracy. The list went on. Regina finally broke when the judge announced sentencing. 10 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years probation. She'd have to pay restitution to all victims. Her nursing license was permanently revoked. She screamed that we'd destroyed her life, that Mom was actually sick, that this was a miscarriage of justice. The bailiffs dragged her out, still yelling. Outside the courthouse, the other victims hugged Mom. They exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. Loss squeezed my shoulder and thanked me for being brave enough to investigate. The prosecutor shook our hands and said it was one of the strongest cases he'd ever presented. We drove back to Sarah's house in silence. Mom stared out the window while Sarah navigated traffic. I sat in the back, finally allowing myself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for months. The trial was over, but the healing would take much longer. That night, Mom cooked dinner for the first time since her release. Her hands stayed steady as she chopped vegetables. Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around the familiar space. She made spaghetti with garlic bread, nothing fancy, but it tasted like the best meal we'd ever had. Dad called the next morning. He'd found a therapist who specialized in manipulation victims and wanted to start sessions immediately. He asked if he could see me. Mom left the decision to me. I agreed to meet him at a park, neutral ground where we could talk. The conversation was awkward and painful. Dad apologized repeatedly, said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, promised to do whatever it took to repair our relationship. I told him I needed time. He nodded and didn't push. We agreed to weekly phone calls and would see where things went from there. Mom decided to look for a new job rather than return to her old company. Too many memories, too many people who'd believed Regina's lies. She updated her resume and started applying to positions at smaller firms. The interviews were challenging when they asked about the gap in employment, but she decided to be honest about what happened. I went back to school full-time. The whispers eventually died down as new dramas captured everyone's attention. My grades improved and I joined the debate team, finding I had a talent for constructing arguments and examining evidence. The guidance counselor said I'd make an excellent lawyer someday. 3 months after the trial, the facility where Mom had been held closed permanently. The investigation had revealed widespread fraud and abuse. Other families received settlements. The building stood empty, a reminder of what had happened there. Mom drove past it once, then never again. Regina's brother was disbarred and faced his own trial for conspiracy charges. He received 3 years in prison. The therapist who'd written the false evaluation never practiced again. The administrator served 5 years. The notary lost her license. Everyone who'd participated in Regina's scheme faced consequences. Mom found a job at a nonprofit that advocated for patients' rights. The pay was less, but the work felt meaningful. She helped families navigate psychiatric holds, ensuring proper procedures were followed. Her own experience made her particularly effective at spotting potential abuse. We moved into a small house 6 months after the trial. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom rental near Sarah's place. Mom painted the kitchen yellow and planted herbs in window boxes. I got my own room instead of sleeping on Sarah's couch. It felt like a fresh start. Dad continued therapy and slowly began to understand how thoroughly Regina had manipulated him. He sold our old house and used part of the money to pay for Mom's ongoing treatment. He moved into an apartment nearby and we had dinner together once a month. The conversations were still stilted, improving. A year after Regina's conviction, Mom felt strong enough to help other victims. She spoke at support groups, sharing her story and offering hope. She never minimized what happened, but showed that recovery was possible. Her hands no longer shook when she told the story. I graduated high school with honors and received a scholarship to study pre-law. Mom cried at the ceremony, proud tears this time. Dad came too, sitting several rows back, but there, Sarah took too many photos. It felt like we'd survived something impossible and come out the other side. Mom still had bad days. Certain triggers brought everything back, but she had tools now, ways to cope that didn't involve being over-medicated into compliance. She saw a therapist weekly and took only the medications she actually needed. Her recovery wasn't linear, but it was real. 5 years later, I was in law school when I heard Regina had been denied parole. She'd shown no remorse and was considered likely to reoffend. Mom didn't attend the hearing, but several other victims did. They told the board about the lasting damage, the trust issues, the years of recovery required. Regina would serve her full sentence. Our family never returned to what it was before Regina. That innocence was gone forever. But we'd built something new from the ruins. Stronger in some ways because we'd fought for it. Mom was free. Dad was learning. I was becoming the person I needed to be. We'd survived a predator and refused to let her win.